On the morning of April 12, 1981, 14-year-old Sheila Sharp walked through the Keddie Resort in California. She was heading back to Cabin 28 after a sleepover, only to find the curtains drawn shut and the lights completely off. She pushed the wooden door open. Instead of her sleeping family, the heavy, metallic smell of blood flooded the air. On the living room floor lay her 15-year-old brother, John, and his friend Dana Wingate. They were bound at the ankles with medical tape and electrical cords, their heads beaten and throats slashed. Nearby, Sheila's mother, Sue, was hidden under a yellow blanket, gagged with her own underwear and a blue bandana. 4 people entered a cabin in the California woods. 3 were slaughtered, and 1 was taken. And 3 young boys, lying in the very next room, inexplicably slept through the screaming. Look at this photograph of Cabin 28. It sits in a former railroad town deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains. 36-year-old Sue Sharp moved her 5 children here in 1979 to escape a highly abusive marriage, seeking safety in the isolation of the woods. On the night of April 11, the family scattered. Sheila went to sleep next door at the Seabolt family's cabin, removing her from the house entirely. This floor plan shows how the rest of the family settled in for the night. John and Dana hitchhiked back from a nearby town and entered the front living room. 12-year-old Tina returned from watching television next door around 10 p.m. Meanwhile, 10-year-old Ricky, 5-year-old Greg, and their 12-year-old neighbor, Justin Smart, went to sleep right here, in the back bedroom. A completely normal bedtime routine inadvertently carved the tiny cabin into isolated zones. The teenagers were exposed near the front entrance, while the youngest children were physically trapped at the rear of the house. The evidence left behind shows the killers arrived with a specific, premeditated plan. They did not simply grab what was available. They brought rolls of white medical tape and a claw hammer with them into the woods. Once inside, they combined their weapons with items scavenged directly from the cabin, stripping electrical cords from appliances to bind the boys, and using the butt of a Daisy 880 BB gun as a bludgeon. The violence inflicted on the victims was highly performative. The killers bent a kitchen steak knife backward from the sheer force of their strikes and took the time to secure Sue's gag with a bandana and layers of medical tape. This level of staging requires time and comfort. The killers did not panic and flee. They remained inside Cabin 28 for hours in the dark, executing a prolonged, agonizing assault. The attack was loud enough to breach the cabin walls. At around 1:30 in the morning, a couple in a nearby unit woke up to the sound of muffled screams, but drifted back to sleep when the noise stopped. The sheer duration of the slaughter, the extreme physical force required to bend a knife, and the volume of the screams make the surviving boys' story nearly impossible to believe. The violence happened mere feet from where they lay, but the gruesome discovery obscured an equally terrifying detail. 12-year-old Tina Sharp was missing. The only trace of her was a patch of blood left behind on her bed. In the frantic hours following the discovery, 12-year-old Justin Eason desperately tried to tell the police that Tina was gone. The authorities, overwhelmed by the carnage, completely ignored him. Investigators eventually formed a chilling theory. Sometime during the attack, Tina woke up and walked into the living room holding a blanket, asking what was happening. The killers grabbed her, silencing her screams, and carried her out the back door. This abduction forces a reevaluation of the entire night. If the goal was simply to kill, they could have finished the job inside the cabin. Instead, they took the risk of transporting a live witness out into the night. When neighbors finally pulled Ricky, Greg, and Justin to safety through the back bedroom window, the boys presented a unified, baffling alibi. All 3 insisted they slept peacefully through the entire massacre. But Justin's story eventually fractured. During clinical interviews with psychologists, the 12-year-old boy shifted from claiming he slept to describing a highly specific, vivid dream he had while under hypnosis. He described 2 men holding a hammer, a bleeding woman on the sofa, and a young girl being carried away. The details in the boy's dream perfectly matched the forensic realities of the crime scene, specifically the positioning of the bodies and the weapons used. Crucially, law enforcement had classified this exact information and hidden it from the public. A 12-year-old boy could not dream classified crime scene data. The forensic accuracy of his statements proves Justin was not dreaming. He was awake, trapped in the darkness of the back bedroom, watching the massacre unfold through a crack in the door. As the sun rose over Keddie on April 12th, police tape surrounded Cabin 28. The community locked their doors, terrified by the realization that whoever committed this butchery had vanished seamlessly into the surrounding woods. The horror of the night was followed by decades of questions. 43 years later, the weight of this case comes from more than the violence in Cabin 28. It comes from the decades of institutional failures and ignored leads. On the morning of April 12, 1981, a 14-year-old girl returning from a sleepover opened the door to Cabin 28 in the Keddie Resort. Inside, she found her mother Sue, her brother John, and his friend Dana Wingate. They had been stabbed, bludgeoned with a claw hammer, and strangled. In the middle of the carnage, 12-year-old Sheila Sharp was missing. 3 younger boys had actually slept through the violence in an adjacent bedroom. One of them eventually provided police with descriptions of 2 men he remembered seeing that night, which led to these forensic sketches. Investigators soon realized the faces in those sketches resembled 2 men who lived right across a narrow dirt road. Marty Smart and his friend John Boobity were staying together in Cabin 26, only yards away from the victims. Smart was a veteran of 2 tours in Vietnam. Just weeks before the murders, he had sought psychiatric help at a VA hospital in Reno for explosive anger and severe marital issues. Smart met Boobity at that same hospital. A convicted bank robber, Boobide's criminal history placed him within the organized crime networks shown here. His specific ties reached the upper tiers of the Chicago mob, enforcing the hierarchy of an organized crime syndicate. The murders at Cabin 28 were a calculated, localized strike, carried out by men with a dangerous history who lived right under the nose of local law enforcement. In 2000, shortly after Marty Smart died, his former VA therapist contacted authorities. He revealed that Smart had confessed to the murders during an appointment in May 1981. Smart claimed he killed Sue Sharp because he believed she was interfering in his marriage. He also told the therapist he had easily beaten the police polygraph test. Smart had an unusually close relationship with the man leading the investigation. He was personal friends with Sheriff Doug Thomas, who had actually lived with the Smart family for a period of time. When the California Department of Justice intervened, they dispatched special agents from their organized crime unit, rather than homicide detectives, to interview the suspects. The DOJ's focus on Boobide's mob ties, combined with the sheriff's personal friendship with Smart, created an institutional shield that allowed both men to leave town without facing charges. In 2016, a new investigator named Mike Gamberg took over the cold case. He began treating the landscape around Keddie as an active crime scene, looking for physical evidence that might have survived the decades. A search of a dried-up pond near the resort entrance recovered a rusted claw hammer. It matched the exact description of the hammer Smart told police he had lost the night of the murders. 2 years later, forensic testing turned to a piece of white medical tape found at the original crime scene. Technicians were able to extract a DNA profile from the adhesive. That profile provided a direct match to a known suspect who was still alive. While the human investigators of 1981 chose to look away, the physical artifacts buried in the mud and preserved in evidence bags survived to provide the forensic links that were missing for 37 years. In April 1984, 3 years to the day after the murders, a man collecting glass bottles found a skull fragment in the wilderness 60 miles away from Keddie. The remains, later confirmed to be Sheila Sharp's, were found in a remote, off-trail area of Butte County. The location was so isolated that investigators questioned how a casual bottle hunter could have happened upon it by chance. Immediately after the discovery, an anonymous tipster called the sheriff's office. He correctly identified the remains as Tina's before forensic identification had even been attempted. Modern investigators later discovered that the original cassette recording of that call and its only backup had both vanished from the locked evidence room. Today, Despite the recovery of a murder weapon, a therapist's confession, and a DNA match to a living person of interest, no one has been charged. The tragedy of the Sharp family is documented in a permanent archive of ignored leads and missing tapes,